This lesson is going to show you how to write verbal and numerical expressions. Verbal expressions are expressions that use verbs like add, subtract, multiply, or divide. So they're going to be written out and everything will be in word form. An example would be add 10 and 7. A numerical expression uses numbers. So I would show the number 10, the addition sign, and 7. We also have keywords that we're going to be looking for as we're trying to change verbal to numerical expressions. Write down these keywords to help refer back to as we solve these problems. Now and then means after. So if I'm reading a problem and it says add 2 and 5, then multiply by 3. When I see then, I know that add 2 and 5 has to happen first. So if I wrote this problem, 2 plus 5, and then multiply by 3, I know that if I were just looking at the rules of PEMDAS, it would say to multiply or divide first, but the word problem says that I need to add first. So in order to make that happen, I'm going to look at the beginning of PEMDAS, which is parentheses. By adding parentheses around the addition, I know that when I go to solve this problem, I will add 2 plus 5 first, then I will multiply by 3. Another important keyword is from, and you'll typically see the word from in problems that use subtraction. So if you see from a number, that number is going to be the number that you start with. So I think of from as being the front. An example would be subtract 8 from 40. Well, because it says subtract 8, I know a subtraction sign has to go in front of the 8. And it says from 40. So the front of this problem should have the number 40. So subtract 8 from 40, 8 is being subtracted, and I started with 40. Let's try taking verbal expressions and turning them into numerical. So I'm going to start with words, and I want to change it into numbers. As we're reading these problems, underline and jot down notes as you go through the steps. So the first example says, add 4 and 20, then multiply by 5. So looking at what's important, I know I'm going to have an addition sign. I know that I'm going to have the number 4, the number 20. I know that there's going to be multiplication, and I know there's going to be the number 5. I also see one of my keywords, then. Then tells me that there's an order to this problem, so I'm probably going to need parentheses. So add 4 and 20 is going to look like 4 plus 20. Then tells me that they wanted me to add first. So as I see then, I know I can go ahead and put parentheses around my addition problem. Now I can multiply by 5. And there's several ways you can write this. This problem would be correct, but I can also write it with no operation sign and just use the parentheses as my multiplication sign. And it's important that if you write it this way, the number you're multiplying goes in front of the parentheses. You would not want to put it at the back of the problem. If you did, you would need to put the operation sign, and it could be a dot or also a star. Let's try the next example. Subtract 11 from 32, then divide by 7. So subtract 11 tells me there's a subtraction sign in 11. And because it says subtract 11, I know that when I write my problem, it must be in this exact order. From 32 tells me there's 32. I also know there should be a division sign, and there's going to be a number 7. Division and subtraction are similar in the fact that when it says divide by 7, the division sign has to be in front of the 7. I also see some keywords, both of them, from and then. From 32 means that 32 is going to be at the front of my problem. Then tells me that there's going to be some parentheses. So 32 is at the front of my problem, and it says I need to subtract 11 from 32. So because subtraction has to stay in this order, it would look like 32 minus 11. So subtract 11 from 32, then tells me that my parentheses need to go around this part. Then I'm going to divide by 7, and I know that the division also has to be written in the same order. Another way to write this problem would be using a fraction bar as your division sign, which would look like 32 minus 11 over 7. Or if you're typing it on a computer, you'll look like a slash and a 7. But this means the exact same thing. Our next example says multiply 3 times 3, then add the product of 2 and 9. So I see multiply 3 times 3, which I know is going to look like 3 times 3. Then is a keyword. Then tells me that multiplying 3 times 3 has to happen first. So I can go ahead and add parentheses around my problem. Then add the product of 2 and 9. Product means the answer to a multiplication problem. And if it's asking for the answer to a multiplication problem, it tells me that this is also going to be something that needs to happen first. So then add gives me an addition sign, and the product of 2 and 9 would look like 2 times 9. Now, because of the operations being used in this problem, I could actually write the expression without parentheses, and according to PEMDAS, I would still solve the multiplication before the addition. But using parentheses helps organize my problem and almost highlights what order I need to do my problem in. If I happen to be using addition or subtraction in this expression, it would matter where my parentheses are. But because it's multiplication and multiplication happens first anyway, it could be written without them. Our next example says, divide 15 by 3. Then subtract the quotient from 10. Quotient is also talking about the answer, but quotient is the answer to a division problem. So I saw from, I know that from means front, so 10 needs to be at the front of my problem. Now I'm going to go back and look at the first few words. Divide 15 by 3. So by 3 means that it needs to look like 15 divided by 3. Now, if I were to write it this way, I could check myself by reading the words and then reading the problem. This says divide 15 by 3. And if I read this, this says 3 divided by 15, which does not match the words. If I read this, it does say 15 divided by 3. So I'm going to divide 15 by 3, then tells me that I need parentheses around this so that I solve the division first. The last thing I have is subtraction. And it says subtract the quotient, or subtract the answer, from 10. So 10 is at the front of my problem, and I know the operation is subtraction that needs to go in front of the quotient. I can check myself by looking at my expression and looking back at the words to make sure that all of the numbers and operations were used. So when I solve this problem, I would solve 15 divided by 3, then I would subtract that answer from 10. Try these 3 problems. Remember to underline important operations, numbers, and circle the keywords. Remember that if you see then, you're most likely going to need to use parentheses. And if you see the word from, you need to make sure that that number is in front of the subtraction sign.